Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We're doing a real deep dive today, getting into the details of a totally fascinating topic, the human mind. Think of it like we're navigating this giant, complex, and sometimes totally baffling mental terrain. Every single day, you and I make countless choices, right? Some are no big deal, while others are completely life-changing. But how do we actually make them? What's going on behind the scenes in that landscape of our mind? Well, let's decode that today using some incredibly insightful concepts from behavioral economics.
And that brings us to this core idea, cognitive landscapes of risk and uncertainty. It's such a great phrase because it perfectly frames our entire journey for this explainer. Look, we're constantly moving through a world where we've got to make choices without having perfect information. It's just a fact of life. We almost never have all the facts. We definitely don't have a crystal ball. And yet we still have to decide, we still act, and we still move forward. So how do our minds actually process the world when the path ahead is, anything but clear?
So here's our map for today's journey. We'll start with the cognitive landscape, then compare risk versus uncertainty. After that, we'll look at behavioral decision models, figure out navigating through ambiguity, and wrap up with applying decision theory.
Okay, let's dive right into this with part 1, the cognitive landscape.
Moving right along to part 2, risk versus uncertainty.
So when we talk about a cognitive landscape, what are we actually picturing? Well, we're visualizing the exact environment our brain operates in when we're faced with a choice. And spoiler alert, it is not some flat, empty, perfectly lit room. Not at all. It's filled with obstacles, hidden paths, and really weird lighting. Behavioral economics essentially studies how we walk through this chaotic space. Our absolute most foundational choices in life, like what career to pursue, whether to invest your savings, who you're going to trust, they are all heavily dictated by human choice under risk and uncertainty. Now, in everyday conversation, people throw those two terms around like they mean the exact same thing, right? But trust me, they are entirely different types of terrain.
Here is an absolutely vital contrast we need to nail down right away. Risk. That refers to situations where we have calculable odds. Think of rolling a pair of dice or just flipping a coin. You might not know the exact outcome of that single coin flip, but you know the statistical probability, right? You know it's a 50-50 chance. You can literally mathematically plan for risk. But uncertainty is defined by unknown variables. This is the situation where you don't even know what the dice look like, let alone how many sides they have. You can't calculate the odds because that underlying information is just completely missing. These are two totally distinct pillars of human choice. They aren't just synonyms for danger. Basically, under risk, we calculate. Under uncertainty, we just have to guess.
All right, let's transition over to part 3, behavioral decision models.
Now, what's really interesting here is that if risk and uncertainty represent this wild, untamed terrain we're walking through, then behavioral decision models are the compasses we use to actually navigate it. Researchers don't just throw their hands up in the air when faced with human irrationality. They map the whole thing out. There's a very clear progression in how we understand these states. First, we examine human choice under risk and uncertainty. From there, we use behavioral models on decision-making to explain the actual mechanics of those choices. And finally, we push even further into the absolute most complex state of all, human behavior under ambiguity.
These behavioral models map how we make complex decisions, and they are utterly, absolutely vital. Think about it. When someone makes a choice that completely defies pure logic, a standard classical economic model, the ones that assume humans are basically perfect, rational, calculating machines, it's going to completely fail to explain what just happened. But a behavioral decision model, it actually factors in psychology, it looks at the emotional environment, our cognitive biases, how we perceive risk and uncertainty, and it reveals the hidden logic behind the irrationality. It shows us exactly why, for instance, a person might choose a guaranteed small reward over a mathematically better but uncertain massive reward. It just makes sense of the mess.
Okay, so we've mapped out risk, where we know the odds. We've mapped out uncertainty, where the variables are unknown, but hey, maybe we can still kind of guess at the structure of the problem. But that leaves us with a pretty profound question. But what happens under ambiguity? Seriously, what happens when we step completely off the map and pivot into the pure, unadulterated unknown?
Let's explore that in part 4, navigating through ambiguity.
Human behavior under ambiguity happens when information is entirely unclear. Let's go back to our room analogy. If risk is a well-lit room with maybe a couple of hurdles to jump over and uncertainty is a foggy room, then ambiguity is stepping into a pitch-black room where the floor itself might literally be moving underneath you. We're not just missing a few variables here, the situation is completely opaque. And in this state, our typical logical decision models struggle the absolute most. People tend to freeze up, or they fall back incredibly heavily on mental shortcuts shortcuts and deep-seated biases, simply because they have absolutely no concrete reference point to hold on to. Understanding how we react when we're essentially flying blind is honestly one of the most formidable, fascinating challenges in all of behavioral economics.
Let's move to our final stop and see how this all builds together in Part 5, Applying Decision Theory.
So it's one thing to understand the terrain, right? To know the difference between risk, uncertainty, and ambiguity. And it's another thing entirely to have a compass. But honestly, the whole shebang doesn't matter if we don't actually use it to reach a destination. We have to translate the theory into action through the application of behavioral decision theory in the real world. This is all about taking these concepts completely off the academic map and bringing them right into practical reality. This is how governments can design way better public policies by actually anticipating irrational public fears. It's how businesses manage to successfully launch completely new products in totally unpredictable markets. And on a personal level, it's how you and I can make much better financial and life choices for our families, even when the landscape ahead is thick with fog.
Which ultimately leaves you with a question to ponder. How will you navigate your own cognitive landscape? Think about it. Now that you actually know the difference between calculable risk and unknown uncertainty, and now that you recognize that deep, deep unknown of ambiguity, how are you going to apply this to your own daily choices? Understanding behavioral economics is not just some dry academic exercise. It's a remarkably powerful tool for navigating real life. I really hope this explainer has given you a much clearer map of your own mind. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.